She built her career catching liars, and never once suspected she was already married to the one man she couldn't catch. Vivienne Mercer has destroyed 37 relationships in 4 years, not out of cruelty, out of truth. Cheaters don't stop cheating. They just get better at hiding it. She knows this the way she knows her own reflection. Her newest assignment should be simple. Seduce a wealthy executive named Damian Ashford, document his response, and collect her fee. What her client didn't tell her, what she doesn't know, is that Damian Ashford is her husband, legally, on paper. In a marriage she ran from 6 years ago without ever looking back. She's about to walk straight into the wreckage of her own life. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because nothing about what happens next is going to go the way either of them planned. The rain came down hard that Tuesday morning, the kind of rain that had no patience for umbrellas or good intentions. It hammered the glass ceiling of the Mercer & Associates office on the 14th floor of a building that had seen better decades, and it turned the street below into a gray river of headlights and spray. Vivienne stood at the window with a cold cup of coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other, watching a cab driver yell at a courier and feeling nothing about it at all. She was 31 years old, and she had not felt surprised by a human being in at least 3 years. The folder belonged to her newest client, a woman named Sandra Colton, who had walked into Vivienne's office 2 days ago wearing a cream blazer and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sandra was 44, polished, the kind of woman who scheduled her grief in 30-minute windows and never showed up late. Her husband, she explained in a voice that had clearly rehearsed itself on the drive over, had been distant for months, working late, traveling more, looking at his phone with a particular quality of attention that she recognized from the first time it happened, 12 years ago, with a different woman. Vivienne had listened without interrupting. She had heard variations of this story so many times that she could have finished Sandra's sentences for her. She didn't. She let the woman talk until she ran out of words, and then she slid a standard contract across the desk and asked about the husband's routine. Sandra didn't want Vivienne to investigate her husband. Sandra wanted someone to test him. There was a difference, and it mattered. Investigation meant gathering existing evidence. Testing meant creating a situation and watching what a person chose to do inside it. Vivienne offered both services. Testing cost more, because it cost more of her. The husband's name was listed in the folder as Damian Ashford. Vivienne had not reacted to the name when Sandra said it. She was trained not to react to things. But standing at the window now with the rain doing its worst against the glass, she turned the name over in her mind the way you turn over a stone you almost stepped on. Ashford. She knew the name from the business pages. Most people in this city did. The Ashford Group was one of those quietly enormous companies that owned other companies. The kind of enterprise that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. Old money that had learned new tricks. Conservative enough to survive recessions. Aggressive enough to keep growing through them. She had done 2 previous jobs involving men from families like that. Both had failed the test. One spectacularly. She flipped open the folder again. The photograph inside showed a man in his mid-30s at what appeared to be a charity function. Dark suit, dark hair, the kind of face that was too controlled to be called handsome outright, but that you'd notice in a room anyway. He was looking slightly off camera, and whatever he was looking at had his full attention. There was nothing soft about the expression, but there was nothing cruel in it either. Vivienne studied the photograph for 30 seconds and then put it back in the folder. She had 48 hours to establish contact. The Ashford Group kept a corporate suite at the Callaway Hotel, a place designed to look like it had always existed while actually being less than 10 years old. All white marble and curated greenery, and a rooftop pool that a travel magazine had photographed 3 times in the past 2 years. It was the kind of hotel that people with Damian Ashford's income used as a second office. He kept regular hours there on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, according to the surveillance notes Sandra had provided. Vivienne didn't ask how Sandra knew this. She never asked. She closed the folder and set down her coffee and went to find something to wear. The plan was simple because the best ones always were. She would arrive at the pool level of the Callaway 45 minutes before Damian's usual appearance. She would be there when he arrived, already present, already part of the scenery. And then she would manufacture a reason for their paths to cross. Vivienne had a vocabulary of reasons. She had used most of them at least twice. The thing she used most often was accident. People trusted accidents because accidents removed intention. If she tripped near him, if she dropped something, if she stumbled at the wrong moment, these were not the actions of a woman pursuing a man. They were simply things that happened. And men who were inclined to betray their commitments generally leaped at things that simply happened because it offered them a story to tell themselves afterward. She was not expecting Damien Ashford to be different from the others. She was, as it turned out, wrong about that. But she didn't know it yet. He said, the Callaway's rooftop pool area was everything the photograph suggested and nothing more. It was beautiful in the flat, professional way of things that had been designed to be beautiful, like a showroom kitchen that no one cooked in. The stone deck was pale gray. The water in the pool was that particular shade of blue that chlorine and lighting conspired to produce. There were lounge chairs arranged at distances that suggested privacy without promising it, and somewhere below the railing the city carried on its business in miniature, all noise and motion and zero concern for the calm up here. Vivienne arrived at 2:15 in a white sundress she'd bought specifically for this kind of job and would donate afterward. Her cover for the week was simple. She was a financial consultant in town from Atlanta, staying at the Callaway on her company's account, working remotely. She had a name, Celeste Ward, a phone registered to that name, a LinkedIn profile she'd had built 6 months ago and kept plausibly updated. The legend was solid. It had held up in tighter situations than this. She chose a lounger with a sightline to the elevator bank and ordered sparkling water from the pool attendant and opened a book she was not reading. At 2:57, Damien Ashford stepped off the elevator. He was taller in person than the photograph suggested. He moved like someone who had decided a long time ago where he was going and hadn't needed to reconsider. There was a younger man with him, carrying a leather portfolio and trying to keep pace, talking while Damien listened without looking at him. The assistant, which is what he clearly was, reached the end of whatever he was saying just as they reached a cluster of chairs near the far end of the deck. Damien said something brief. The assistant nodded, made a note, and retreated back toward the elevator. Damien sat down. He did not take out a phone. He set the portfolio his assistant had left on the table beside him, leaned back, and looked at the skyline. Vivienne watched this over the top of her book and noted it. Most men she observed in their natural element, away from the surveillance of colleagues or spouses, underwent a visible relaxation. The mask slid. The performance dropped. They looked at women. They looked at their phones. They occupied space differently when they thought no one important was watching. Damien Ashford sat and looked at the skyline with the same contained attention he'd walked in with. He appeared to be thinking. He appeared to be doing it seriously. After 12 minutes of this, Vivienne stood up, gathered her book and her phone, and walked toward the pool. The accident required a particular entry point. She needed to pass close enough to the edge near the deep end, and she needed a reason to be moving quickly, and she needed something to catch her attention at the wrong moment. She had done this 4 times across different assignments, twice in pools, once at a marina, once at a fountain in a hotel lobby that had been embarrassingly shallow and made the aftermath awkward. She chose her moment. A pool attendant passed behind her with a tray, and she turned as if startled, and she let her heel find the edge of the wet stone, and she went into the water. It was cold. It was always colder than you expected. She came up fast, sputtered, grabbed for the edge, and let herself miss it. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest someone struggling while trying not to appear to struggle. The dress was soaked and heavy, and she let herself look like she was dealing with that. She heard the splash before she'd fully positioned herself. He was in the water. He had simply gone in. No hesitation, no assessment, no dramatic announcement of intention. One moment he was on the deck, the next he was in the pool and moving toward her with the efficiency of someone who had decided what was necessary and was doing it. "I've got you," he said. Not loudly, not with the performance of a man who wanted the other guests to know he was being heroic. He got an arm around her and had them at the ladder in 5 seconds. On the deck, she coughed convincingly, thanked him, looked up. And the plan, every structured, tactical element of it, temporarily ceased to matter. His face was close, and it was dripping, and it was looking at her with an attention so direct that it felt like being seen in a way she was neither prepared for nor practiced at deflecting. Not desire. Not the assessment of a man cataloging his options. Something more specific and less readable than either. "You're okay," he said. This also not loudly. I'm fine, she said. I'm sorry, that was clumsy. The stones get slick when they're wet. Management should put better grip tape down. He stood, offered his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet without ceremony and then let go. That was the first thing she noticed. He let go immediately. Most men held on a beat too long. Not out of malice, necessarily. Just because they could. Because the situation had provided an excuse and they took it, the way water finds a crack and uses it. Damien Ashford shook her hand off the moment it was no longer necessary and took a step back to a distance that was courteous and nothing else. Are you staying here? He asked. Yes. 3rd floor down. She ran a hand through her wet hair and felt the cover story settle into place around her like a second skin. Celeste Ward. I'm in from Atlanta. Damien Ashford. He said it without inflection, just information exchanged. I have a meeting room on this floor most days. If you need dry towels, the attendant at the far desk can get you a full set from the spa. He picked up the portfolio his assistant had left. He didn't look her up and down. He didn't offer her his number or his attention in any way that extended beyond what the situation required. He walked back to his chair, opened the portfolio, and resumed whatever he'd been doing before she provided him with an interruption. Vivienne stood there, dripping, wrapped in a towel someone had appeared out of nowhere to hand her, and stared at the back of his head. She had expected him to linger. She had expected the hand to hold on too long, and the eye contact to shift quality, and the conversation to find reasons to extend itself. She had run this scene, or versions of it, 15 times in 4 years, and it always unspooled the same way. The man always pushed at the edges. They always found a reason. Damien Ashford had given her a hotel resource recommendation and gone back to work. She stood there another 5 seconds, recalibrated, and walked back to her lounge chair. Round 1. Inconclusive. Back in her room on the 6th floor, the cover used the 3rd floor as a detail, but Vivienne always booked a different floor for security. She toweled off her hair and sat on the end of the bed and looked at the folder again. Sandra Colton's careful handwriting in the margins of her surveillance notes, always courteous with staff. Doesn't appear to have a type, no documented history of infidelity. That last part had seemed like a note of hope from a wife trying to convince herself. Now Vivienne read it differently. She called her colleague and the only person who functioned as something like a friend in her life, Marcus Hale, who ran the technical side of Mercer and Associates from a desk covered in monitors and empty energy drink cans. First contact, she said when he picked up, and? He got me out of the pool in about 4 seconds and then completely disengaged. A pause. Did you go in too early? Before he was looking? He was looking. He just didn't do anything with it. Maybe he's smarter than the others, playing a longer game. Maybe. She looked at the photograph again. Or maybe he's actually what he looks like. Viv. Marcus's voice carried a note of affectionate skepticism that she'd been listening to for 6 years. In 4 years and how many assignments have we ever had a result of this man is actually what he looks like? She thought about it honestly. No. So I keep going. She closed the folder. I need you to dig deeper on him, not the business stuff, the personal history. What made him who he is? Anything specific you're looking for? She thought about the way he'd let go of her hand, the precise, deliberate quality of the distance he'd put between them. Just background, she said. I want to know what I'm working with. She ended the call and lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling. The rain had followed her here. It was still going outside, quieter now, a steady pressure against the glass. She did not think about the moment their eyes had met in the water. She was disciplined enough to actively not think about it, which is a different thing from the thought not being there. The second contact happened 47 hours later, in the Callaway's lobby restaurant during the lunch service. Vivienne had manufactured a reason to be there by the simple method of being there and being visible. She'd taken a table near the center of the room, ordered a salad she didn't want, and was reading documents on her laptop with the focused air of someone working through something difficult. The restaurant was half full. The kind of lunch crowd that communicated mostly by eye contact and phone screen. Damien arrived with 2 men who had the particular look of lawyers, not the performance of it, but the actual burden of it in their faces, and took a table 3 away from hers. She did not look up when they sat. She gave it 12 minutes. Then she picked up her coffee cup, stood to get a refill from the sideboard, and miscalculated the distance to the table she was passing. The coffee wasn't hot enough to hurt anyone. She'd checked the temperature before she picked it up. But it was dark and it was liquid and it went across the edge of his jacket sleeve in a way that was impossible to ignore. She was already apologizing before she'd finished the motion, profuse and genuine seeming and slightly horrified. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me this week." The lawyers looked uncomfortable. Damien looked at his sleeve, then at her, and his expression went through something brief and internal before settling back into neutral. "It's fine," he said. "It's your jacket. It's a jacket." He blotted the sleeve with a napkin without apparent distress. "It's fine, Ms. Ward." The use of her name, the cover name, which he'd retained from their pool conversation 2 days ago, stopped her apology mid-sentence. She registered it as a data point. He'd remembered her. He'd filed her away somewhere. "I should buy you a new one," she said. "That's not necessary. At least let me— It's fine." He said it with a finality that wasn't rude, but that was absolutely a closed door. He turned back to his lawyers. Vivienne returned to her table and sat and looked at her laptop screen and thought about closed doors. Most men, and she had been cataloging this data for years, used interruptions. They used them as currency. An accident, a collision, a social disruption of any kind became a negotiating position. "You owe me something now. You've created an obligation." The acknowledgement of the debt was the opening. Damien Ashford had twice now declined to collect. She wasn't sure if this was character or calculation. She wasn't sure which one would be more interesting. By the end of the first week, she had documentation of 6 interactions and 0 red flags. She had sat beside him at the hotel bar on Thursday evening and listened to him explain a supply chain problem to a colleague with a patience and clarity that suggested he genuinely cared whether the colleague understood. She had manufactured a situation in the elevator where she was clearly distressed about a call she was on, loudly enough to register, and he had stepped out at a floor before his to give her privacy. She had contrived to need help with a door while carrying a heavy box of documents, a setup so old it embarrassed her slightly, and he had held the door, taken nothing from it, and said nothing beyond what the situation warranted. She was running out of calibrated scenarios. Marcus, when she updated him, made a sound that was somewhere between impressed and concerned. "I've been running background on him like you asked," he said. "And Viv, this guy he's not performing it. There's no history, no tabloid stories, no hushed settlements, no off-the-record anything. His assistant of 4 years says he's the most straightforward boss she's ever had. His staff stays." "Everyone has something," Vivienne said. "I'm not finding it." "Keep looking." There was a silence on the line that she recognized as Marcus choosing his words with care. "I found something else," he said. "Different kind of thing." "Tell me." "He's married." She already knew this. Sandra Colton was his wife, or was claiming to be, which was the premise of the entire assignment. "I know that." "No. He was married. Before Sandra Colton. There's a legal record. An arranged marriage contract, family thing, old money style. Happened about 6 years ago between the Ashford family and another family. His grandmother arranged it." Vivienne went still. "He's been legally married to a woman named Vivienne Mercer for 6 years, Marcus said. She disappeared before they ever met. He's never filed for divorce. Technically, he's still..." "Stop," Vivienne said. Her voice came out flat and completely quiet. "Viv, I need you to stop talking for a second." She set the phone down on the bed. She sat there with her hands in her lap, and the hotel room very still around her, and the city murmuring outside the glass. 6 years ago, she had run from an arranged marriage her grandmother had organized without her knowledge or consent. She had been 25 and furious, and absolutely certain that she would never allow herself to be treated as a financial asset in someone else's negotiation. She had packed 2 bags and left the city for 8 months and come back only after her grandmother was gone. She had never learned the name of the man she was supposed to marry. She had never wanted to know it. Knowing it would have made him real, and real was a complication she couldn't afford. She picked the phone back up. "Say the name again," she said. "Damien Ashford," Marcus said carefully. The man she had spent the past week trying to catch cheating on his wife was, in the eyes of the law, her husband. The man she had fallen into a pool to trick, had spilled coffee on, had watched from across lobbies and dinner tables and elevator banks. He was the man she had spent 6 years refusing to be married to. And Sandra Colton was not his wife. Sandra Colton was something else entirely. "Who is Sandra Colton?" Vivienne asked. Marcus had apparently already pulled this thread. "She's his girlfriend," he said. "Or she was. They've been together about 8 months. I think she hired you to get rid of the existing marriage, not to test him. She wants to know if he'd cheat with you so she has leverage. Or she wants the information to push him toward finally filing for divorce from the wife he's never met." Vivienne sat with this. She had been used. She had been brought in as a tool in someone else's romantic strategy, and she had walked into it because she had not thought to question the premise. She had assumed, as she always assumed, that the client was the wronged party. She had not verified. She had trusted the story Sandra told because the story sounded familiar. It was the first time she had made that mistake in 4 years. The larger problem, the one that sat at the center of everything that she was going to have to look at directly, was something else. The larger problem was that she had spent a week watching Damian Ashford refuse to betray a marriage he didn't know was a fiction, to a woman he'd never met, out of some internal code she hadn't fully understood yet. And she was that woman, and he didn't know it, and she had absolutely no idea what she was supposed to do now. She didn't sleep. The city was the city. It kept going outside the window with its ambulances and its distant music and its general indifference to individual crises. Vivienne sat in the desk chair with her knees pulled up and worked through the options the way she always worked through difficult problems, methodically, from the outside in, stripping away the emotional content until she could see the structure clearly. Option 1, she walked away from the assignment. Refunded Sandra Colton's deposit, wrote it off as a conflict of interest. She should have caught earlier, moved on, clean, professionally defensible. The problem with option 1 was that it left Sandra in possession of information, specifically Vivienne's real name and the nature of the assignment, that could be weaponized. Sandra Colton had hired Mercer and Associates. She knew the firm's name. If she was strategic enough to construct this whole scenario, she was strategic enough to cause problems if she felt she'd been abandoned. Option 2, she completed the assignment, continued to pursue Damian, documented his responses, produced the report Sandra had paid for, maintained the professional boundary, except that she now knew the assignment had been built on a deception, and completing it meant producing documentation that could be used to harm, or at minimum pressure, a man who had, to all observable evidence, done nothing wrong. The problem with option 2 was that it required her to keep lying to someone who was apparently incapable of lying himself, and she was finding that prospect newly uncomfortable in a way she couldn't entirely explain. Option 3 was the one she didn't want to look at. Option 3 involved the word divorce, and the 6 years she had spent refusing to think about the man attached to that paperwork, and the 7 days she had just spent watching that man without the knowledge that he was already known to her in the most technical and absurd sense possible. She needed a divorce. She had always needed a divorce. She had simply delayed it because getting divorced required acknowledging that you were married, and acknowledging that she was married to a man she'd never met required a conversation about the grandmother and the obligation and the transaction that she had spent 6 years not having. The thing she kept returning to, the thought she couldn't quite exile from the room, no matter how many times she threw it out, was the pool. The cold water and the arm around her and the 4 seconds it had taken him to decide. She kept returning to the way he'd let go. The distance he'd stepped back to that said, "I am not using this." She kept returning to the lobby bar and the elevator and the fact that tested 7 different ways across 7 days, he had consistently chosen something that looked a lot like integrity. She did not know what to do with this information. She got up at 5 in the morning and went to the window and stood there until the city got light. The conversation she needed to have with Sandra Colton happened the next day in a coffee shop 2 miles from the Callaway. Vivienne arrived first, chose a corner table, ordered black coffee, and waited. Sandra came in looking composed, which told Vivienne something. A genuinely worried spouse would have been fraying by day 8. Sandra looked like a woman managing a project. "You have something for me," Sandra said. Not a question. "I have questions for you." Vivienne said. Something shifted behind Sandra's eyes, quick, controlled. We discussed scope during our initial meeting. We discussed a lot of things. One of the things we didn't discuss is that the man you hired me to test isn't legally your husband. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long and said more than Sandra would have wanted it to. I don't know what you... Sandra. Vivienne kept her voice level and quiet. She had done confrontational conversations hundreds of times. She preferred them to pleasant ones because at least they were honest. You knew about the prior marriage. You knew he'd never filed for divorce. You hired me hoping to either catch him in something that would give you leverage or get information that would pressure him into finally formalizing the dissolution of a marriage he's been ignoring for 6 years. That's what this is. Sandra was quiet for a moment, then with a precision that Vivienne had to respect, she changed tactics. He loves me. He's just traditional. He won't start something new without finishing something old, even if finishing something old requires admitting it ever existed. That sounds like a you and him conversation, Vivienne said. He doesn't talk about it. Have you asked him to? Sandra's composure developed a hairline fracture. I've given him 8 months. That's not an answer. He knows I know. He won't address it. Vivienne looked at this woman across the coffee shop table and found herself unexpectedly and without planning to, feeling something close to compassion. Sandra Colton was not a villain. She was a woman who had been waiting for a man to close a door he'd left open for 6 years, and she had gotten impatient and made a bad decision about how to apply pressure. It was human. It was understandable. It was also Vivienne's problem now. I'm terminating the assignment, Vivienne said. Full refund. No report. Sandra stiffened. That's not what we agreed to. The assignment was built on a material misrepresentation. That voids the contract. Vivienne folded her hands on the table. I'm giving you a recommendation instead, and it's free. Talk to him. Tell him what you told me. That you need him to resolve this before you can move forward. If he's the man his record suggests he is, he'll respond to honesty better than leverage. She stood, left 2 $20 bills on the table for the coffee, and picked up her bag. You sound very certain about what kind of man he is, Sandra said behind her. There was an edge in it, the edge of a woman who had been reading the situation and drawing conclusions. Vivienne paused with her back to the table. I've been watching him for a week, she said. I've spent a lot of professional energy trying to find his weakness. I didn't find it. She started walking again. Good luck, Sandra. She got outside and stood in the morning air and the city noise and breathed. The problem, of course, was that terminating the assignment didn't terminate the situation. She was still the other wife, the one on paper, the one who had vanished before they'd ever met, and then spent 6 years not making the problem go away. Every inconvenience Damien Ashford currently had regarding his relationship with Sandra Colton existed in significant part because of a decision Vivienne had made at 25. She hadn't thought about it that way before. She had thought about her own escape, her own refusal. She had not thought about what she'd left behind or who she'd left it with. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus. I need the contact information for Damien Ashford's personal attorney, she said. I'm going to initiate divorce proceedings. Okay, Marcus said slowly. And the assignment? Terminated. She started walking. Marcus, don't ask me anything else right now. Understood. She ended the call and put the phone in her pocket and walked for a long time through a city that seemed to have opinions about everything today, loud and close, and entirely unconcerned with her particular situation. She didn't look at the Callaway Hotel as she passed it. She kept her eyes forward and her pace even, and she was almost proud of herself for that. Almost. The attorney's office called her back inside 2 hours. His name was Richard Chu, and he was courteous and precise in a way that told her he had been briefed on the situation before she called, which told her that Damien Ashford was more aware of his legal circumstances than he'd let on. That was interesting. Ms. Mercer, Richard Chu said, I appreciate you reaching out. I want to be upfront with you. My client has been aware of this matter for some time and has been waiting for you to initiate contact. Vivienne stood on a corner with traffic going around her. How long? I'd say approximately 2 months. He became aware of your professional location about 2 months ago. He's known where I was for 2 months. Yes, she She processed this. Why didn't he initiate? A brief pause. He felt it was your right to take the lead on that. His words were, I can look up the exact phrasing if you'd like. Please? The sound of a file opening. She ran from something. If I show up at her door, I become the thing she ran from. I'll wait. Vivienne stood on the corner for a long moment. He didn't send anyone? She said finally. He didn't. No. He waited. Richard Chu's voice was carefully professional. I can begin the paperwork immediately if you'd like to proceed. We can have documents ready for signing within... I'll be in touch, Vivienne said. She ended the call. She stood on the corner for 2 more minutes, which felt like significantly longer, while the city ran its business around her. Then she turned around. She walked back the way she'd come. She walked past 2 blocks and stopped in front of a bakery she'd used as a landmark earlier that morning and tried to identify exactly what was happening in her chest. She had run from an obligation, a transaction, an arrangement designed by people who thought love was logistics. She had been right to run. She still believed that. She believed it completely. The principle was sound. The problem was that somewhere in the execution of the principle, she had left behind a specific individual, not the abstraction of her arranged husband, but an actual person who had apparently been sitting with the situation for 6 years with enough patience and enough respect for her autonomy that he hadn't come looking even when he'd known where she was. That was not what she had imagined. She had imagined, when she imagined him at all, which she tried not to, someone who would have been angry, entitled, someone who would have pursued the legal matter aggressively, or had her family pressured, or sent representatives, the kind of man her father was, or the kind her grandmother's world had produced. She had not imagined this. She had not imagined a man who would look at a 2-month window of opportunity and decide to wait because it was her right to lead. She started walking again. She walked all the way back to the Callaway and through the lobby and into the elevator and up to the rooftop level, and she was entirely unsure, even as she was doing it, what she was planning to do when she got there. The pool deck was quiet in the mid-afternoon. Only 2 other guests, far at the other end. The sun had worked its way through the cloud cover and was doing its best, warming the pale stones. Damien Ashford was at his usual table with his portfolio open. He looked up when the elevator opened. He looked back down at his work. Then he looked up again. Vivienne crossed the deck. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down in it without asking and set her bag on the table between them. He looked at her with that direct, unreadable quality that she had spent a week trying to decode. My name isn't Celeste Ward, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Something that had been held very still began to move. I know, he said. The 2 words landed in the space between them like a coin dropped from a height. She hadn't expected that. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, which was not a thing that happened to her. And he saw it. And some very small part of his expression that was not quite a smile changed the temperature of the moment by a fraction. How long have you known? She said. 3rd day, he said. Your colleague, Marcus Hale, has a digital footprint. Once I knew Celeste Ward was a cover, it didn't take long. You've known for 5 days that I was running a honey trap on you. Yes. And you just kept going, kept behaving the way I'd have behaved anyway, he said. The not quite smile was completely gone now. He was entirely serious, because that's the only answer to something like that. She sat with this. Outside the railing, the city stretched away to the horizon. I called your attorney this morning, she said. I know, he called me. I told him I wanted to initiate divorce proceedings. Damien Ashford looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the skyline on that first afternoon, with a completeness of attention that left no part of the view unaddressed. Do you still want that? He said. And that was the question she had been walking toward all morning without knowing it. The question that had been waiting at the end of every calculation and every strategic option she'd laid out on the hotel bed at 3 a.m. She should say yes. She knew the shape of yes. Yes was clean and logical and consistent with everything she had believed about herself and her life for 6 years. Yes was the ending she'd always planned for this particular unfinished thread. She looked at him, at the man who had pulled her out of water without hesitation and then stepped back. At the man who had let her spill coffee on his jacket without using it, at the man who had sat with her real name in his possession for 5 days and waited for her to show up and say it herself. "I haven't decided," she said. He nodded once, the way he nodded, like he was taking information in, not performing a reaction to it. "Fair enough," he said. And outside the railing, below them both, the city kept moving, indifferent as cities always are, completely unaware that somewhere on a hotel rooftop, two people who had been married for 6 years without ever meeting were, for the first time, sitting in the same place at the same time, and neither of them knew what that meant yet. But the not knowing had changed quality. It was no longer the not knowing of avoidance. It was the not knowing of something that was about to begin. Vivienne picked up her bag. She stood. "Same time Thursday?" she said. He looked up at her from the portfolio. "I'll be here," he said. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and did not look back. But she felt the space behind her differently than she had felt any space in a long time, occupied and specific and charged with the particular electricity of a thing that has not yet happened. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed, and somewhere in the city, in an office she didn't know the address of yet, Sandra Colton was going to make a move that neither of them had seen coming, a move that was going to change Thursday into something neither of them was ready for. But that was still 2 days away. For right now, the doors closed, and Vivienne Mercer, for the first time in 6 years, allowed herself to not immediately know what came next. Thursday came in cold and overcast, the kind of sky that couldn't decide between rain and restraint, and settled for both in half measures. Vivienne arrived at the Callaway rooftop at 2:40, 20 minutes earlier than she'd implied, because she needed the time to sit with herself before he got there and figure out exactly what version of honest she was planning to be. She had spent 2 days making decisions and unmaking them. The divorce paperwork sat in her email in draft form. Richard Chu had sent over a preliminary document set within 12 hours of her call, efficient and thorough and waiting for her signature. She had opened the file 4 times. She had not signed anything. She told herself this was because she was reviewing the terms carefully, which was true, and also because she was not entirely sure what she was reviewing them for, which was also true and considerably more uncomfortable. Marcus had called on Wednesday morning with a tone in his voice she recognized as the one he used when he had information he wasn't sure she wanted. "Sandra Colton filed a complaint," he said. Vivienne had been standing in her bathroom at the time, toothbrush in hand, looking at her own face in the mirror. "What kind of complaint?" "With the licensing board. She's claiming Mercer and Associates engaged in an undisclosed conflict of interest and breached client confidentiality." The toothbrush came down on the counter. "She doesn't have grounds." "She doesn't need grounds to file. She needs grounds to win. But the filing itself is public record, and the licensing board will send a formal inquiry within 2 to 3 weeks. You'll need to respond." Vivienne looked at her reflection for a moment, the particular stillness she put on when things were going wrong, and she was deciding how to address them. "She's trying to pressure me back into completing the assignment," she said. "That's my read. Or she's trying to preemptively discredit me in case I produce anything that damages her position with Ashford. Also possible. Could be both." A pause. "Viv, you know I'm always on your side, but this one got complicated fast. You want to talk about why we're still in contact with this situation at all?" She hadn't answered that. She told him she'd handle the board inquiry and ended the call and stared at the bathroom mirror for a long time afterward. The reason they were still in contact with the situation was sitting at his usual table when the elevator opened, and he looked up when she crossed the deck, and he didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted slightly in a way that she was beginning to be able to read. He had coffee. He had 2 cups, which meant he'd anticipated her arriving before the attendant came around, which meant he'd been paying attention to her habits. She registered this without acknowledging it. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the cup he pushed toward her. It was the right temperature, which shouldn't have meant anything, and did anyway. "Your girlfriend filed a complaint against my company," she said. He didn't look surprised. He set down the pen he'd been holding. "She's not my girlfriend." That's an interesting piece of information to lead with. "It's accurate." His voice was level, not defensive. "We've been over for 3 weeks. She made that decision. I didn't argue it. 3 weeks ago is approximately when she hired me." "Yes." He looked at her directly. "I figured that out about 5 minutes after I figured out who you were." Vivienne absorbed this. The city was doing its quiet work below the railing. Somewhere a helicopter passed, distant and purposeful. She hired me to catch you cheating, she said. And when that didn't produce results, she pivoted to damaging me professionally so I couldn't cause her problems. That sounds right. Does that make you angry? He considered the question seriously. The way she was starting to understand, he considered most things. Disappointed, he said. Not angry. Why not angry? Because being angry at her doesn't solve anything. She was in a situation she didn't know how to get out of cleanly. She made a bad choice about how to apply pressure. He paused. That's human. Vivienne stared at him. She had used almost exactly those words to herself, sitting across from Sandra in the coffee shop 2 days ago. She had thought them privately, arrived at them through her own process, and here he was saying the same thing without knowing she'd thought it. She did not mention this. She filed it somewhere quiet and went on. I need to know what you're going to do about the complaint, she said. I've already called Richard. He's going to reach out to the licensing board directly and provide a statement clarifying that no actual work product was produced and no confidential information was exchanged. That should get the inquiry closed before it goes anywhere. You don't have to do that. I know. It's my problem. It became my problem when my ex-girlfriend created it using my name, he said. That's not generosity. That's just responsibility. He picked up his coffee. I'm not going to let someone else's bad decision damage your business because it's tangentially connected to me. She watched him drink his coffee. She watched the controlled ease of it, the lack of performance, the complete absence of any quality that suggested he was aware of how he was coming across and managing it. You knew who I was for 5 days, she said. You let me run a honey trap on you for 5 days knowing exactly what it was. Yes. Most people would have confronted that immediately. Confronting it immediately would have forced you into a defensive position. I didn't want you defensive. I wanted you to get there on your own. Get where? He set down the cup. He looked at her. Here, he said simply, to this conversation. The word landed with a weight it shouldn't have had for its size. Vivienne made herself hold eye contact. She was good at holding eye contact. She did it professionally. We need to talk about the divorce, she said. Something moved through his expression and settled. I know. I should have initiated it years ago. I didn't, and that wasn't fair to you. You were 25, he said, and someone had made a major life decision for you without asking. Running made sense. It left you in a legal situation you didn't choose. I chose not to address it. That was my decision. He was quiet for a moment. My grandmother arranged that marriage. She thought she was doing right by me. She thought she understood what I needed better than I did. A pause. She was wrong about the method. She was probably right about the general direction. Vivienne went very still. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Make it mean something. We've been in the same room for a total of maybe 4 hours. You don't know me. I don't know you. That's true, he said, without any change of pace. The smart move is the divorce. Clean break. Both of us move forward. Also true. Stop agreeing with everything I say. I agree with what you're saying, he said. I'm less certain you believe all of it. She opened her mouth. She closed it. This was becoming a habit around him that she didn't like. I believe in finishing what I start, she said, and heard the ambiguity in it the moment it left her mouth, and watched him hear it too. Neither of them addressed it directly. Below the railing, the city offered its usual testimony about how much it didn't care about individual moments of reckoning. A distant siren. Traffic establishing the standard argument it always had with itself. The particular flatness of mid-afternoon urban noise that was somehow comforting in its indifference. Have dinner with me tonight, he said. She looked at him. He paused. Not as anything other than what we are. Two people who are technically married and have never had a single honest conversation. I'd like to have one before we sign anything. That's a reasonable position, she said. I have a lot of them. This time, the not smile made it all the way to the surface for about half a second. She felt it like a change in air pressure. 7 o'clock, she said. Somewhere that isn't this hotel. There's a place on Callister Street, Marin's. Good food, not loud. I know it. She stood, picked up her bag. I'll be there at 7:15. Why 7:15? Because I'll be there at 7 and I'm not going to be the first one there. He was quiet for a beat. I'll be there at 7:10, he said. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and did not allow herself to smile until the doors were closed. Marin's was the kind of restaurant that had been there long enough to stop trying, which meant the food was excellent and the lighting was the honest yellow of actual bulbs rather than the engineered flattery of places that knew they were being photographed. Vivienne arrived at 7:12, and he was already at a corner table, which meant he'd revised to 7 and hadn't told her. She noted this and found she didn't mind. They ordered. They talked. The talking came easier than it had any right to, given the circumstances. He asked about her work, not with the condescension of a wealthy person asking a professional class person how they filled their time, but with an actual curiosity about methodology, about the psychology of it, about what it was like to be trusted with the worst moments of strangers' relationships. She answered honestly and asked about his in return, and he answered the same way, and they were 2 hours into the dinner before either of them noticed. She asked about his grandmother. She died 2 years ago, he said. We had a complicated relationship because of the marriage she arranged. Partly. Mostly because she was a woman who expressed love through control and never understood why that didn't land the way she intended. He turned his wine glass. She wasn't cruel. She was certain. Certain that she knew what was best and certain that her certainty was equivalent to caring. It isn't. No, Vivienne said. My mother was the same. My father escaped it by dying young, which I used to think was a terrible thing, and now understand better. He caught himself. That's a dark thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. He looked at her across the table. You have the same quality, he said, of saying things the way they are rather than the way they're supposed to sound. It causes problems, I imagine. My father is... He negotiated my grandmother's arrangement for me. He thought it was a reasonable trade. Family alliance for family security. She kept her voice even. She was practiced at keeping her voice even when she talked about this. He framed it as love, as wanting the best for me. He had the language exactly right. But not the practice. Not even close. She looked at her wine. My mother spent 30 years married to a man who was performing care rather than providing it. She was worn down by it, ground down. By the time I was old enough to understand what I was watching, she was already mostly gone. Present, but not there. I'm sorry, he said. I don't want sorry. I'm explaining why I ran. I know. I want you to know, she said, and the specificity of it surprised her, that it wasn't about you. I want you to know that I didn't run because of anything about you specifically. You were an abstraction, a variable in someone else's equation. I ran from the equation. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, the street moved in its usual patterns. People and light and the low-grade urgency of a city at night. I know, he said again, and then, for what it's worth, I would have hated it too. She looked up. Being arranged, he said. If I'd been in your position, 25, someone else's decision, no conversation, I would have hated it. He met her eyes. I don't fault you for running. I want you to know that. She looked at him for a long time. We're very different people, she said. Completely. This is complicated. Extraordinarily. And the divorce is still the logical choice. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet and exact. The logical choice, he said. Yes. She heard what was not said in the pause before it. She chose not to excavate it. They finished dinner. He walked her out. On the sidewalk in front of Marin's, they stood in the mild night air and the particular moment that arrives at the end of an evening when the next move is not yet determined. Thank you for dinner, she said. Thank you for being 14 minutes late. I said 15. You got there in 14. I was in the bar for a minute first. Something crossed his face that was briefly and completely a real smile. She felt the temperature of the evening change in a way she was going to have to think about later. Good night, Vivienne, he said. Her real name, not Celeste, hers. Good night, she said. She walked to where she'd left her car and drove back to her apartment. Not the hotel, her actual apartment, because she'd checked out of the Callaway the previous day. and sat in her parked car outside her building for 10 minutes in the dark. She was going to sign the divorce papers. She was going to sign them and close this out and go back to her life, which was good and purposeful and entirely her own construction. She was going to do that. She went upstairs and opened her laptop and opened the document Richard Chu had sent. She read through it for the 5th time. She did not sign it. She closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark with the sounds of her street outside the window. Familiar, specific, the geography of a life she'd built for herself, and tried to understand the particular quality of the thing she was feeling, which was not happiness exactly, and not peace, and not the clean satisfaction of a resolved problem. It felt more like standing at a window before a storm. The pressure change, the electricity in the air, the knowledge that something large was moving toward you, and you had not yet decided whether to stay or run. She had run before. She knew how. She was less certain tonight that she wanted to. She ran anyway, not literally, not in the way she had at 25, but the next morning she called Richard Chu and told him to finalize the papers for signature, and she sent Marcus a message that said wrapping this up without elaborating, and she went to the office and worked through 6 hours of backlogged case reviews with a focused intensity that left no room for anything else. It worked until 4 in the afternoon when Marcus appeared in her office doorway with an expression she didn't like. "What?" she said. Sandra Colton held a press briefing this morning. He held up his phone. She could see a thumbnail on the screen. Sandra, in the cream blazer, behind a cluster of microphones. She's gone public. She's alleging that Damian Ashford used Mercer and Associates to conduct illegal surveillance on her, and that when she tried to file a complaint, she was pressured to withdraw it. Vivienne sat back in her chair. "She's inverting the story," she said. "Completely. She's positioning herself as the target. She hired us. She's the client. She knows that. She's betting you won't go public with the client relationship because it would expose Ashford's prior marriage and your involvement with him." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "It's actually a pretty good bet, Viv. If you produce the contract, the story becomes your identity as his wife. If you don't produce it, her version sits out there uncontested." Vivienne looked at the ceiling. She breathed. She did the thing she always did when a problem was trying to make her emotional. She stripped it down to components. "She's protecting herself," she said. "Ashford is going to move on. She can see that. She can't have the story be that she was replaced, so she's making it about misconduct instead." "Right. And she's using our firm as the weapon because we're adjacent enough to the situation to be plausible, and we can't defend ourselves without making things worse." "Right again. That's actually," she exhaled, "she's smarter than I gave her credit for." "Is that relevant right now?" "It's always relevant." She picked up her phone. "I need to call Damian." Marcus straightened slightly. "Okay, first name basis." "Marcus, I'm not saying anything." "You're saying a lot." She waved him out. He went. Damian picked up on the second ring. "I've seen it," he said, before she could speak. "She's going to bury us both with this if we don't respond." "I know. I need to know what you want to do. This is your name attached." A pause. "Richard's already drafting a response. We're going to issue a statement through Ashford Group Communications that addresses the allegation directly. I'll be named. The arrangement will be disclosed." "The arrangement?" She stopped. "You're going to acknowledge the marriage." "I can't refute Sandra's story without acknowledging the context that makes it false." His voice was measured. "The marriage has been a matter of legal record for 6 years. It's not a secret. It's just something no one has asked about. Once it's out, I know. The press is going to want the rest of it. They're going to want to know where I've been for 6 years. They're going to want to know why we never—" "I know, Vivienne." She stopped. He'd used her name again. Same weight, same specific quality of attention. "This is going to complicate the divorce," she said. "Yes. And you're still going to put the statement out." "I'm not going to let her story stand." His voice was completely even. "I'm not going to let her damage your firm with a lie to protect herself from a situation she created. I can stop this, and I'm going to stop it." She stood up from her desk. She moved to the window. Below her, the city was going about its afternoon business, entirely indifferent, reliably itself. "Damian." She said his name carefully, like she was testing its weight. "Once this comes out, once it's public, your grandmother's family, the board, the press, they're all going to want resolution. They're going to want to see what happens with the marriage. You understand that? Yes. We can't hide from it. I'm not planning to hide from anything. She looked out at the city. She looked at the middle distance where the sky met the roofline of the building across the street, and she thought about the dinner the night before and the 14 minutes and the way her real name sounded when he said it. I'll call Richard, she said. We'll coordinate the statements. Good. A silence stretched between them that was neither awkward nor empty. It was the silence of two people who were both standing at the edge of something they'd been walking toward from opposite directions and had only just recognized as the same edge. Vivienne, he said. Don't. I wasn't going to say anything significant. Whatever it was, don't say it yet. A beat. Okay, he said. She ended the call and stood at the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass, feeling the cold of it, grounding herself in the physical fact of where she was and what was real. In 4 hours, Richard Chu's statement was going to go out through Ashford Group channels. In 4 hours, the city was going to know that Damien Ashford had a wife. Her name was going to be attached to his publicly for the first time in 6 years. The press was going to find her, and Sandra was going to respond, and the whole architecture of the quiet legal fiction she'd been ignoring was going to become very loud and very present and very impossible to postpone. The divorce papers were still unsigned on her laptop. She had a feeling, specific and unwelcome and probably accurate, that signing them now was going to be considerably more complicated than it had been this morning. Her phone lit up. Marcus. She answered. The statement just went out early, he said. Richard must have had it ready. It's already being picked up. How fast? It's trending. A pause. Viv, there's more. Someone, I don't know who yet, just sent a photograph to 3 different outlets. It's you and Ashford, last night, outside Marin's. She closed her eyes. Someone was watching us, she said. Someone has been watching you both for at least a week, Marcus said. Viv, the photograph has context. It has your face and his face, and the headline one outlet is already running is... He stopped. Tell me. Ashford's secret wife, 6 years, 1 dinner, and a business built on catching cheaters. The cold from the window glass traveled up through her palm and into her arm and settled somewhere in the middle of her chest. They have everything, she said. Not everything, but enough. Marcus's voice was careful. Whoever provided this photograph knew exactly what story it would tell. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone built this. She thought about Sandra Colton, efficient and controlled in a cream blazer, eyes that didn't reach their smile. She thought about the timeline, the press briefing this morning, the photograph released in the same news cycle, the statement from Ashford Group hitting before they'd coordinated, all of it landing within 6 hours of each other in a pattern too precise to be coincidence. She planned this, Vivienne said. All of it. The complaint was just to get us talking. She knew disclosing the marriage publicly was inevitable once we started. She just wanted to control when and how it happened. She wanted to be on record first. So what do we do? Vivienne stood at the window a long time. The city below her was the same city it had always been. Indifferent and enormous, and full of people making decisions in rooms exactly like this one, trying to figure out which way the damage ran and how much of it was survivable. Nothing, she said. Not tonight. Tonight it runs and we don't feed it. Tomorrow morning I want you in the office early. We're going to need to go through every case file we have and identify anything that could be pulled into this if someone starts digging. And Ashford? I'll handle Ashford. She ended the call. She set the phone down on the window ledge and looked at her own reflection in the glass, transparent against the city, the buildings and lights showing through her like she wasn't entirely there. She thought about what Marcus had said. Someone built this, the specificity of it, the patience of it. A week of surveillance, a filing with the licensing board, a press briefing, a photograph. All of it assembled and released at exactly the moment designed to do the most damage to the most people with the least ability to deflect. It was good work, technically. She could see that clearly, the way a locksmith respects a lock even when someone's using it against them. It was patient and thorough, and it had used her own professional methods against her. She respected it, and she despised it in equal measure, and she was going to dismantle every piece of it. But first she needed to understand something she didn't yet understand, which was the identity of the person who had put a surveillance team on both of them for a week without either of them noticing. Sandra Colton was smart, but this level of operational execution was beyond what a jilted girlfriend organized alone. There was someone else in this. There was infrastructure behind it, money, coordination, a purpose that went beyond Sandra's personal situation. Someone wanted the marriage public. Someone had been waiting for exactly this moment. Her phone lit up again. Not Marcus this time. Unknown number. She looked at it for 3 rings, then she answered. The voice on the other end was a woman. Older, dry, precise, with the unhurried quality of someone who had never in her life been rushed into anything. Vivienne Mercer, the voice said. This is Evelyn Ashford. I believe it's past time we spoke. Vivienne's hand tightened on the phone. Damien's grandmother was supposed to be dead. She had been told, by Damien himself just last night, that his grandmother had died 2 years. Vivienne did not move. She stood at the window with the phone against her ear and the city bleeding through her reflection in the glass. And she did not move, because moving would have meant reacting, and reacting would have meant accepting what she had just heard as real. You're dead, she said. Not an accusation, a fact she was testing against the available evidence. Evidently not. The voice on the other end was entirely composed. The composure of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had rehearsed neither side of it because she didn't feel she needed to. My grandson told you I died 2 years ago. He told me last night at dinner. Yes, he believes that. A pause with texture in it, the texture of something old and deliberate. He was told I died. He attended a memorial service. He grieved in the way Damien grieves things, which is privately and completely and without display. Another pause. He was lied to. Vivienne turned from the window. She needed to be moving. She walked to her desk and sat down and kept her voice flat and even, because that was the only kind of voice that was useful right now. By whom? She said. By my physician, at my request. By my attorney. By 2 members of my household staff. A breath. By me, ultimately. The decision was mine. You faked your own death. I arranged a disappearance with paperwork attached to make it legally credible. The older woman's voice carried no apology in it and no expectation of one. I had reasons. I'd like to hear them. I imagine you would. That's why I called. A brief pause. Are you going to hang up? Vivienne looked at the wall across from her desk. There was a framed photograph on it. Her and Marcus at the opening of the office, 3 years ago, both of them slightly exhausted and slightly disbelieving that they'd actually done it. She looked at that photograph and breathed once, slowly, through her nose. Talk, she said. Evelyn Ashford talked. The story took 11 minutes. Vivienne listened without interrupting, which cost her something, but which she paid because interrupting would have slowed it down, and she needed the full shape of it before she could do anything with any piece of it. The shape, when it was complete, was this. Evelyn Ashford had arranged the marriage between Vivienne and Damien 6 years ago for reasons that were partly financial and partly something she described as corrective. She had watched her grandson moving toward a relationship with a woman she believed was catastrophically wrong for him, a woman named Petra Weil, who had, in Evelyn's assessment, a talent for extracting resources and an allergy to honesty, and she had decided that a formal legal commitment to someone else was the cleanest way to terminate that trajectory before it produced children or a merger. Vivienne's grandmother, Margot Mercer, had been Evelyn's friend for 40 years. The arrangement had been mutual and willing on both sides. Neither granddaughter nor grandson had been consulted because neither woman had believed consultation was necessary. Vivienne running had disrupted the plan. Damien, informed that his wife had declined to appear, had quietly absorbed this information and redirected his energy toward his work and away from Petra Weil through what Evelyn described as his own discipline, which was the one quality she had never doubted in him. The marriage sat on paper, undisturbed, for 6 years. And then Evelyn, watching from whatever constructed absence she had built for herself, through whatever channels an 80-year-old woman with significant resources and no ethical concerns about surveillance maintained, had watched Sandra Colton appear in Damien's life, and had watched the months accumulate, and had made a decision. "I needed them to find each other," Evelyn said. "Properly. Without my fingerprints on it. Damien would never have gone looking for you on his own, not because he lacked interest, but because he respects boundaries in a way that his father never did, and that I never properly appreciated until it was almost too late. He would have waited forever if you hadn't come to him." Vivienne's jaw was tight. "So you arranged for me to come to him?" A silence of about 2 seconds. "Sandra Colton did not find Mercer and Associates on her own," Evelyn said. The cold that had started in Vivienne's palm at the window was everywhere now. It was in her hands and her throat and the space behind her eyes. "You sent her to me," Vivienne said. "I made sure she knew your firm existed and that it specialized in exactly the kind of service she believed she needed. The rest was her own decision. You pointed a loaded gun and then told yourself she pulled the trigger. I created a situation in which you used me." The flatness in her voice fractured along one edge. She heard it and pulled it back. "You used both of us. You built a situation where I would have to come into direct contact with your grandson, and you didn't tell either of us, and you've been watching it from behind a fake grave for 6 years, and you're calling me now because the press coverage means you can't stay hidden anymore, and you want to—" She stopped. "What do you want, Evelyn? What is the call for?" The silence this time was longer. When Evelyn spoke, her voice had changed by a fraction, a degree of something that in a different person Vivienne might have called uncertainty. "I want to ask you not to tell Damien," she said. Vivienne sat with this for 3 full seconds. "Excuse me," she said. "He believes I'm dead. He has grieved me. Telling him the truth now would what? Would hurt him?" Vivienne stood up from the desk. The chair scraped back hard against the floor. "You orchestrated 6 years of his life from a position of fabricated death, and you're asking me to protect you from the consequences of that. I'm asking you to consider what it would do to him. He is not," a pause. "He does not process betrayal the way most people do. He goes quiet with it. He goes somewhere internal and the door closes and it doesn't open again." "I know," a brief pause. "You've seen that. I've been watching him for 2 weeks. Then you know that if he learns this, then you should have thought about that before you built your entire plan around the assumption that your judgment superseded everyone else's." Vivienne was across the room now, at the far wall, her back to the window. She was pacing without having decided to pace. "You know what you sound like? You sound exactly like my father. You sound like every person who has ever made a decision about someone else's life and then called it love when it went right and called it a misunderstanding when it went wrong. The silence on Evelyn's end was absolute. "You have resources," Vivienne said. "You have the operational reach to run surveillance on both of us for weeks. You have attorneys and staff and a faked death certificate. You have everything except the one thing this required, which was honesty, and you chose not to have that on purpose." She stopped moving. She stood still in the middle of her office and breathed. "I'm going to tell him." "Vivienne, I'm going to tell him, and whatever happens after that is between him and you. That's all I'm willing to say to you right now." She ended the call. She set the phone down on her desk with a deliberateness that cost her something, because what she wanted to do with it was different. She stood there with her hands flat on the desk and her head down, and she breathed in and breathed out and let the full scope of what she'd just learned settle into her like sediment dropping through water slowly, layer by layer, until it reached the bottom. She had been a piece. Not a person, not a participant. A piece. Moved by a hand she hadn't seen, across a board she hadn't known existed, toward a square she hadn't chosen. The assignment, the hotel, the pool, the dinner, all of it predated by an architecture she had walked into without knowing the walls were there. She did not cry. She had not cried about anything in approximately 4 years, and she was not going to start tonight. But she sat down on the floor next to her desk, which she had not done since the night her grandmother died, and she put her back against the wood and her knees up, and she sat in the dark of her own office and waited for the worst of it to pass. It took about 7 minutes. Then she got up, picked up her phone, and called Damien. "Tiao." He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone. She heard it in the single syllable of his answer, the contained alertness of someone who had been waiting. "I need to see you," she said. "Tonight. Not the hotel. A pause. My apartment. I'll send you the address. Give me 40 minutes. She hung up. She went into the bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists, which was something her mother had shown her when she was 12 and which she had never told anyone about because it was private in the way that survival techniques were private. She looked at herself in the mirror, the same face she always had. It looked like the face of a person who had just been informed that the ground under her life was constructed and the construction predated her. She dried her hands and went to find her car. His apartment was on the 19th floor of a building in the east quarter of the city, not the address you'd expect from the heir of the Ashford Group, which was to say it was good but not performative, the kind of place a person lived because they liked it rather than because of what it communicated. The building was older. The elevator was slow. She stood in it and felt it rise and watched the floor numbers change and thought about what she was going to say. There was no good order for it. There was no arrangement of the information that made it land gently. She was just going to say it. He opened the door before she knocked, which meant he'd heard the elevator. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket, the controlled ease of a person in their own space. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him step back and let her in without a word. The apartment was exactly what she might have built for him if she'd been asked. Clean lines, not sparse. Books, actually used, on shelves that covered one full wall. A kitchen that looked like someone cooked in it. Windows on the east side that held the city at a distance that was respectful rather than acquisitive. A desk in the corner with multiple screens and the organized disorder of someone who worked seriously. She stood in the middle of the main room and turned to face him. "Your grandmother is alive," she said. The quality of stillness that came over him was unlike anything she'd seen on his face before. Everything that was usually contained but present, the slight mobility at the corners of his eyes, the micro-expressions that she'd spent 2 weeks learning to read, all of it went somewhere deep and locked behind a door that closed without a sound. He stood there. "She called me tonight," Vivienne said. She staged her death 2 years ago. The memorial, the paperwork, all of it was constructed." His voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Why?" Not a question. The shape of a question without the expectation of an answer. The way you say why when you already know that no answer will be sufficient. "She said she needed to step back from your life without you trying to find her. She said she had reasons." Vivienne kept her voice even. She kept her eyes on his face, and she did not look away. "She also said she was the reason Sandra Colton found my firm. She directed Sandra to me. She knew who I was. She's known where I was for years. She built the situation that brought us into contact." The silence in the apartment was total. Outside the east windows, the city carried on, but the city was elsewhere. In here, there was only the sound of a man processing the specific category of information that arrives when someone you trusted, someone you mourned, reveals themselves to have been watching you from behind the curtain of their own death. Damien walked to the window. He stood at it with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and he looked out at the city. She watched the muscles in his shoulders. She watched his breathing. She watched him do what Evelyn had described and what she had glimpsed in other moments. Go somewhere internal, the door closing, the lock engaging. "Damien," she said. "Nothing. I know this is... Give me a minute." His voice was fully controlled and completely without expression, and it was the most alarming thing she'd heard from him in 2 weeks. She gave him the minute. She stood in the middle of his apartment and waited because that was what the situation required, and because she understood, viscerally and completely, what it felt like to have the architecture of your past revised without your consent. She had felt it at 25 when she'd found out about the marriage. She had felt it again tonight when Evelyn called. The difference was that she had run. She was watching him decide whether to run and in which direction, and she did not know yet which way he was going to go. When he turned around, his face was different. Not soft. Damien Ashford's face was never soft, but the controlled quality had shifted. It looked like a face that had gone to war with itself in the space of 60 seconds and emerged with something that was neither victory nor defeat, but was honest. "She manipulated everything," he said. "Yes. The marriage. Sandra. Your assignment. She built it all." "Yes." "And she called you to ask you not to tell me." "Yes." His jaw tightened. Just once, briefly. But you told me. You had the right to know. He looked at her across the room for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't name and wasn't sure she was supposed to see. He walked to the desk and sat on the edge of it and put one hand over his face and pressed his fingers against his forehead and breathed. She stayed where she was. She did not cross the room. She gave him the space because it was his to have. She lied to me, he said from behind his hand. She let me... He stopped. He took the hand away. He looked at the floor. I stood at a grave. I said things I believed she would never hear. I made decisions based on... He stopped again. 2 years of decisions made inside the belief that she was gone. I know. And she was watching. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes had a quality she recognized because she saw it in mirrors sometimes. The particular brightness of someone who is not going to cry and is paying for the decision. What do you want to do? He said. She frowned slightly. What do you... About us. About the situation. He met her eyes. She built it, but we're inside it. I'm asking what you want to do. It was the most direct question anyone had ever asked her in circumstances this indirect. She stood in the middle of his apartment and looked at the man her grandmother and his grandmother had tried to arrange into her life, and she thought about all the ways she had run from that arrangement and all the walls she had built and all the reasons she had built them. I don't know yet, she said. Okay. I know I'm angry. So am I. And I know that the anger it's the right response. She had no right to do any of this. Neither did my grandmother 6 years ago. Neither did my father, ever. She crossed her arms not defensively, physically, to hold something together. But I also know that the fact that it was manipulated into happening doesn't change what actually happened. And what actually happened was... She stopped. Was what? He said quietly. She looked at him. 2 weeks of evidence, the pool and the coffee and the elevator and the dinner. The way he'd let go of her hand, the way he'd said her real name for the first time, and the temperature of the room had changed. Something I didn't expect, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once, the way he always nodded, taking information in, not performing. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face closed. It's her, he said. Vivienne's pulse did a single, hard kick. He held the phone and looked at it for 3 rings. 4. 5. Then he answered. Grandmother, he said. The word came out with a precision that was surgical and completely cold. Vivienne had not heard that tone from him before. She had not known he contained it. She watched him listen. She watched his face do nothing, absolutely nothing, while the voice on the other end spoke. She could not hear the words, but she could hear the rhythm of them. The same measured cadence she'd heard in her own ear 40 minutes ago, and she watched Damien Ashford absorb that cadence with a stillness that was no longer the stillness of patience. It was the stillness of a decision being made. No, he said. Whatever Evelyn said in response. No, I'm not going to do that. He turned away from Vivienne, not dismissively, deliberately, to give her a partition between his private conversation and her presence. You want to tell me why? You want to give me the reasoning. I don't want the reasoning, not tonight. A pause. Because tonight it wouldn't matter. Anything you say tonight, I'm going to hear through what you did, and what you did is going to be louder. Another pause. Evelyn speaking. I know you think you did it for me, he said. I know that's what you believe. That's the part that's going to take me the longest. He paused. Don't call again tonight. He ended the call. He stood with his back to Vivienne and the phone in his hand and the city in the window ahead of him. And for a moment he was completely still, and the stillness had weight and dimension. Then he turned around. I need to deal with the press situation tonight, he said. His voice was the voice she knew again. Measured, direct, no performance in it. Richard has been calling. The story is moving faster than we expected. I know. Marcus has been tracking it. Sandra issued a second statement an hour ago. She's doubled down. She's named you directly, and she's alleging that you and I had a prior professional relationship that constituted a conflict of interest in the original assignment. He set the phone down on the desk. She has the photograph from outside Marin's, and she has a source, I don't know who the source is yet, claiming that you were inside the Callaway for a week under a false identity. I was. That's true. The false identity was at her request for the purpose of the assignment she hired me to conduct. I know that. She knows it too. She's betting you can't prove the authorization without exposing the full context of the assignment, which exposes the marriage, he paused, which we've already exposed, which changes the calculation. Vivienne uncrossed her arms. She was thinking now, which was better than feeling. Thinking was a room she knew every corner of. She doesn't know we've gone public on the marriage, she said. The statement went out 2 hours ago. She knows. Then her second statement is a response to being outmaneuvered. She's escalating because we took her primary leverage away. Vivienne walked to the desk, not to invade his space, but because it was the right place to think from. She's going to keep escalating until she finds something we can't absorb. The licensing board complaint is still active. If she can get that inquiry to move faster, she can't, Damien said. Richard already closed it. I told you. Richard closed it through Ashford Group channels. If Sandra brings in her own attorney and files a supplemental complaint citing tonight's coverage as new evidence of the conflict of interest, she'll do that, Damien said. She'll do it by morning. They looked at each other across the desk. We need Marcus, Vivienne said. I'll call Richard. I need a full audit of the Marin's photograph. I want to know when it was taken, what equipment, whether there are more images from the same source. If someone had a team on us for a week. She stopped. She thought of Evelyn. She thought of the infrastructure behind a faked death and 6 years of quiet surveillance. The surveillance team might have been Evelyn's. Something shifted in Damien's expression. Not surprised. He'd processed the Evelyn information, filed it, was moving through it the way he moved through everything. If it was her team, she might have more photographs, more documentation, more of everything. Vivienne met his eyes. If she was building this situation, if she wanted us to find each other, she would have been collecting evidence of it, evidence that could either help us or be used against us depending on who controls it. She called you, he said. Not me. She called you first. Because she thought I was the softer target. She thought... Vivienne stopped. She thought I might protect her from you knowing. But you didn't. No. He looked at her. Why? She held his gaze. Because you deserve to know the truth more than she deserved to be protected from it. The apartment was very quiet. Outside the east windows, the city was the city. Distant, perpetual, exactly itself. That's the first time anyone has ever put what I deserve above their own comfort, he said. His voice was completely flat when he said it, the flatness of a statement of fact, and it landed in the room without drama and without any expectation of response. And it was somehow the most devastating thing he'd said to her yet. She stood at his desk and looked at him and felt the full weight of the situation, the manipulated architecture of it, the genuine thing that existed inside that architecture, the divorce papers unsigned on her laptop, the press coverage running through the night, Sandra Colton escalating, Evelyn Ashford alive and watching, the licensing board, Marcus, Richard, the photograph outside Marin's, the pool, the hand she'd let go of too quickly. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Marcus. A text, not a call, which meant it was fast information. Sandra's attorney filed the supplemental complaint 20 minutes ago. But that's not the problem. Check your email. Someone just sent your firm's entire client list to 3 journalists. Full names, case details, outcomes, everything. Vivienne read it twice. Her client list. 37 cases over 4 years. Names that had been promised absolute confidentiality. Marriages, affairs, investigations, outcomes, all of it now moving toward publication. Her firm was not just threatened. Her firm was finished. Everything she had built, the work and the reputation and the promise she had made to every client who had sat across her desk and trusted her with the worst thing happening in their life. All of it, released into a news cycle that was already running hot. Time to land at the exact moment when her credibility was most compromised and her ability to defend herself was most constrained. She set the phone down on the desk face up so Damien could read the message if he chose to. She stood with her hands flat on the wood surface and looked at the wall of books across the room and breathed. Vivienne, he said, don't. She kept her eyes on the books. Give me 30 seconds. He waited. She breathed. She counted. She did the thing she always did. Stripped the emotion out, looked at the structure, found the load-bearing walls. The load-bearing wall was this. Whoever had sent the client list was not Sandra Colton. Sandra wanted leverage over Vivienne, not the destruction of her. A living weapon was more useful than a dead one. Sandra needed Vivienne compromised, not annihilated. This was someone else. This was someone who wanted Vivienne Mercer entirely removed from the board. She straightened up. She looked at Damien. "Someone is trying to destroy me," she said. "Not Sandra. Someone else. Someone who wants me out of this situation completely. Out of your life, out of the story, out of the picture." She picked up her phone. Who, in your world, would benefit most from me being gone?" Damien answered without hesitating. "Petra Weil," he said. The name landed clean and hard. Vivienne looked at him. "Your grandmother arranged the marriage specifically to get you away from her." "Yes." "So Petra knows about the arranged marriage." "She found out about it 8 months ago, around the time Sandra and I started seeing each other." He moved to the desk, sat down fully in the chair, and his face had the look of a man assembling pieces he'd been holding separately and not yet put together. "She came to me. She framed it as closure. She said she'd spent 6 years not understanding why I'd ended things with her, and she'd finally learned about the marriage contract. And she wanted to know if I'd chosen the arrangement over her deliberately." "Had you?" "I'd chosen not to be with her. The arrangement was incidental." He said it without cruelty, but without softness either. She didn't accept that answer. She told me the marriage was the only reason, and that if I dissolved it, if I formally ended it, she and I could... He stopped. I told her no. "When was this conversation?" 8 months ago, same week Sandra and I started seeing each other. Vivienne put it together. "So Petra watches you move into a new relationship instead of coming back to her. She knows the arranged marriage is still legally intact. She knows the wife has never appeared. And she knows that if the wife appeared, the marriage becomes real in a way it wasn't before," Damien said. "Not just paperwork, an actual obstacle. So she needs me gone," Vivienne said. "Not leveraged, not pressured. Gone. Discredited, destroyed, removed from the situation entirely before I can become something she can't compete with." She picked up her phone. She had the resources to run surveillance. She had the motive to release the client list. And she had 8 months to build the infrastructure. "Sandra," Damien said. "What about her?" "Sandra didn't find your firm on her own. My grandmother told you that. But Evelyn didn't send her. She directed her. There's a difference. Someone had to put the idea in Sandra's head first. Specifically your firm. Specifically the honey trap approach." He looked up. "What if Petra found Sandra? What if Petra told Sandra about your firm and suggested the assignment, knowing that putting you in contact with me was the fastest way to surface the marriage publicly, which was the fastest way to force a resolution," Vivienne said. "Either I disappear into the story and become a target, or the marriage gets dissolved publicly and Petra gets what she wanted 6 years ago. Except she didn't account for us, actually." He stopped. The unfinished sentence sat in the room. Neither of them addressed it directly. They were past the point of addressing things indirectly, but some things still needed another 20 minutes before they could be said out loud. "I need Marcus," Vivienne said. "Right now, tonight." She was already dialing. Chum. Marcus arrived 40 minutes later with a laptop bag and the expression of a man who had been moving fast and thinking faster. He shook Damien's hand with the brief efficiency of someone who didn't have time to form opinions and spread his equipment across the kitchen table and had 3 screens running within 4 minutes. "Client list," he said, without preamble. The file that was sent to the journalists was pulled from a server backup, not the live system. That means whoever accessed it had credentials, not just a hack. They were inside our system before tonight. Vivienne's jaw tightened. "How long?" "At least 3 weeks. Possibly longer." He pulled up a log on the center screen. "There are access footprints that don't match any of our regular users. Whoever it was covered their tracks, but not perfectly. There's a ghost signature on 4 separate access events, and they all originate from the same IP cluster." He turned the screen toward her. "That cluster belongs to a private security firm called Harlow Consulting." "Who employs Harlow Consulting?" Damien said. Marcus looked at him and then at Vivienne with the specific expression of someone about to say something they'd rather not. Ashford Group, he said. They're on your vendor list, have been for 2 years. The kitchen was very quiet. Damien stood with one hand on the counter and looked at the screen and said nothing. The quality of his silence was different now from the silence in the living room when he'd learned about his grandmother. That had been grief going inward. This was something going outward, building pressure, looking for a controlled exit. Someone inside Ashford Group gave Harlow the authorization, Vivienne said. Or someone with Ashford Group credentials, Marcus said, which is a longer list than it sounds. There are 47 people with administrative access to vendor contracts at that level. Narrow it, Damien said. His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. Pull the authorization logs for Harlow's contract. I want to know who renewed it, who accessed it, and who communicated with them in the last 6 months. Marcus looked at Vivienne. Do it, she said. He started typing. Damien pushed off the counter and walked to the window again and stood with his arms crossed and his back to the room. Vivienne watched him from across the kitchen and understood that what she was looking at was a man making the specific kind of decision that involved accepting a cost before knowing its full size. She recognized the posture because she'd stood in it herself, twice tonight. It's someone I trust, he said. Not to anyone. To the window. Yes, she said. Someone with enough access and enough history with the company to use Harlow without triggering an internal flag. Yes. And enough personal motive to want you out of the picture before you became... He stopped. Before I became something that closed a door permanently, she said. He turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen with all the directness he always had and added to it something rawer that she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger exactly. The thing underneath anger where the actual damage lived. I'm sorry, he said, that this came for you. Don't apologize for other people's choices. I'm not apologizing for their choices. I'm sorry it landed on you. He held her eyes. There's a difference. Marcus, to his credit, kept his eyes entirely on his screens. The authorization logs took 18 minutes to pull and 3 minutes to read. Betrayal had been added to the Ashford Group vendor communication list 14 months ago as an independent consultant on a real estate acquisition project. The project had concluded 9 months ago. Her access credentials had not been revoked. She had used them 6 times in the 3 weeks prior to tonight, the last access occurring at 9:47 p.m., 43 minutes before the client list was delivered to the journalists. Marcus put the timestamp on screen and sat back. She's still logged in, he said. Right now. She accessed a secondary file 12 minutes ago. Vivienne looked at Damien. He was already on his phone, and his voice when he spoke was the quietest she had ever heard it, which meant it was also the most dangerous. Richard, I need you to contact Harlow Consulting's director tonight. Yes, tonight. And inform them that their contract has been terminated effective immediately and that any further action on their current assignment constitutes unauthorized access under federal statute. A pause. Yes. Pull Petra Vile's vendor credentials. Lock them now, not in the morning. Another pause, shorter. And get me an emergency injunction on the client list publication. I want it filed before midnight. He ended the call. He looked at Vivienne. The injunction will hold the publication for 24 to 72 hours, long enough to build a proper response. It won't stop all 3 outlets. It'll stop the largest one. The other 2 will follow the injunction or risk being named in it. He set the phone down. Petra is going to know we've cut her access within the hour. She's going to move. Move how? She has whatever she's already collected, the photographs, the access logs, whatever other documentation she built over 3 weeks. He looked at Marcus. Can you tell what else she pulled from the system? Marcus was already running the query. His face changed as the results populated. She pulled communication logs, he said, between Vivienne and Sandra, the initial contract negotiation, and... He stopped. Marcus, Vivienne said. She pulled your personnel file, he said. Your actual personnel file from the licensing board database. Not just your firm records. Your personal history, your address, your legal name, your family records. He turned the screen around, including your grandmother's name and the original marriage contract. The room went to a different quality of silence. She has everything, Vivienne said. Everything that matters legally, Marcus said. She has the original contract documentation. She can prove the marriage was legitimate. She can prove Vivienne knew about it and ran. She can prove the cover identity at the Callaway was Vivienne's. She can frame the entire sequence as Vivienne infiltrating Damien's life under false pretenses to protect an arranged marriage claim. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not true, but it can be made to look true. Damien said, "Where is she?" Marcus looked at him. "I can find out." "Find out," Marcus typed. 40 seconds. Her car's GPS saw she has a vehicle registered through the Ashford Group fleet. That access hasn't been cut yet. Puts her at the Ashford Group headquarters building. Marcus looked up. "She's in the building right now." Damien picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He was already moving. "I'm coming with you," Vivienne said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She picked up her own jacket. "She built this to destroy me. I'm going to be in the room when it ends." He looked at her for 1 second. He nodded. They went. Go. The Ashford Group headquarters occupied the top 6 floors of a tower in the financial district that had been designed to communicate permanence without the vulgarity of ostentation. At 11:40 p.m., the lobby was staffed by 2 security personnel who came to attention when Damien walked through the door and stayed there when they saw his face. He did not slow down. He went to the elevator bank and hit the button for 32, the executive floor, and stood in the elevator with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes forward, and Vivienne stood beside him and felt the pressure of what was coming in her chest like weather. The elevator opened onto a floor that was mostly dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass on all 4 sides. Conference rooms and offices on the interior, view corridor running the perimeter. One office at the far end had its lights on. They walked toward it. Petra Weil was at a desk that wasn't hers. It was the desk of Damien's executive assistant, positioned outside his corner office, with a laptop open and a phone face-up beside it, and a glass of water she hadn't touched. She was in her late 30s, with the kind of face that had been beautiful longer than it should have been and was using it with full awareness. When the door opened, she looked up with the specific quality of someone who had been expecting interruption and had prepared for it. She looked at Damien first, then at Vivienne, then back at Damien. "You moved fast," she said. "Tell me what you've sent," he said. She leaned back in the chair with a composure that cost her something. Vivienne could see the cost in the way her hands settled deliberately onto the armrests. "The journalists have everything they need. The injunction will hold the client list temporarily, but the marriage documentation is already out. Your attorney can't pull that back." "The marriage documentation isn't a problem," Damien said. "We issued a statement about the marriage 3 hours ago." Something shifted in Petra's expression. A fraction. Enough. "You went public first," she said. "You built a situation to force us apart," he said. "We stepped toward each other instead. You didn't account for that." "I accounted for a lot of things." Her eyes moved to Vivienne again. Something in the look was specific and appraising and entirely without warmth. "I didn't account for her being what she is. I expected someone who would run again." "I've been running for 6 years," Vivienne said. "I'm tired." "You don't know him." The words came out flat and hard. Not emotional. Petra Weil had the emotions on a very tight rein, and the rein was holding, but it was visible. "You have 2 weeks. I have 11 years. I know every room he closes. I know what he looks like when he's actually happy versus when he's managing. I know—" "You know who he was," Vivienne said. "You built a case on what you knew. He changed, and you didn't." "Don't!" The composure cracked along one edge. "Don't stand there with 2 weeks of observation and tell me—" "I'm not telling you anything about who he is," Vivienne said. "I'm telling you that what you did tonight to my firm, to my clients, people who trusted me with the most painful things in their lives, is something I'm going to hold you accountable for. That's not about him, that's about me." Petra looked at her. The 2 women held eye contact across the desk for a long moment that had its own specific gravity. "The clients whose information I released signed confidentiality waivers that include arbitration clauses," Petra said. "You'll spend 3 years in civil litigation, and your firm won't survive." "Stop," Damien said. He said it quietly. Just the one word, but it cut. Petra looked at him. "You accessed company systems using credentials that should have been revoked 9 months ago," he said. "You engaged a company vendor to conduct unauthorized surveillance on private individuals. You leaked confidential legal documents and private business records. He looked at her with the directness that was the most constant thing about him, the thing that had been there from the first moment in the pool and had not varied once. I'm not angry at you, Petra. I need you to understand that. He stopped. I'm sorry for whatever part of what I did 11 years ago made you believe this was a path. Her composure finished cracking. She put it back together in about 3 seconds because she was who she was, but it cracked first. You ended it without explanation, she said. Her voice was even, but it had weight now. 11 years and you ended it in a phone call. I know. You didn't. I know. I handled it badly. I was 26 and I didn't know how to have the conversation, and I took the coward's exit. He didn't look away from her. I should have told you the truth directly. What I felt. What I didn't feel. All of it. I owed you that and I didn't give it to you. That's on me. She looked at him. Something ancient and specific moved through her face and left it. But this is done, he said. Tonight. What you built here is done. He pulled out his phone and called someone, not Richard, someone else, and spoke for 90 seconds in the measured cadence of a man giving instructions to someone who would execute them without requiring elaboration. Vivienne caught the words access logs, documentation, and HR and legal hold and tonight, and then he ended the call and put the phone away. Richard is going to send someone up, he told Petra. You should call your own attorney before they arrive. Petra looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at Vivienne one more time. The look of a woman reading a situation she'd tried to prevent and had not prevented and was choosing, finally, to accept. She picked up her phone and started dialing. They left her there. In the elevator going down, Vivienne stood with her back against the wall, and her head tipped back and her eyes closed and breathed. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she noticed and disliked and couldn't entirely stop. The adrenaline had been running for 4 hours, and the cost was arriving now, in the elevator, in the form of a tremor she couldn't manage. Damien looked at her hands. He didn't say anything. He reached out and put his hand over both of hers, steady and warm, and held them still. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Thank you, she said. You did most of it, he said. I didn't cut the credentials. You came, he said. You could have sent me alone. You came anyway. The elevator opened onto the lobby. They walked through it and out onto the street. The city at midnight had its own specific texture. Thinned out, more honest. The performances of daytime stripped back to the people who were still out because they genuinely needed to be. The air was cool and carried the edge of the earlier rain. Vivienne stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the tower they'd just walked out of, and then at the street stretching away in both directions. The injunction won't hold forever, she said. No, we have 72 hours at best. We need a complete statement, not a press release, a full account. The marriage, the assignment, Petra, well, all of it. If we control the narrative before the injunction lifts, the story that runs is the one we tell, rather than the one she built. I know. He was looking at her. That means going fully public. Not just the marriage, your work, your history with the assignment, your grandmother's arrangement, all of it. I know. Are you ready for that? She thought about it honestly. She thought about what it meant. The clients who would see her name in the story and remember sitting across her desk. The cases that would be contextualized in light of her personal situation. The careful professional distance she had maintained for 4 years between her work and her private self. She thought about her apartment and her office and the life she had built from the specific materials of someone who did not trust arrangements and did not wait for other people to make decisions. She thought about the pool. She thought about the hand that let go. She thought about the elevator in the Callaway, the doors closing, the particular feeling of something about to begin. I'm ready, she said. He looked at her with the full quality of attention she had been trying to decode for 2 weeks, and had finally stopped trying to decode because the decoding was the wrong project. The right project was something else. The right project was standing on a sidewalk at midnight and letting the thing that was true be true. My grandmother, he said. I have to deal with her. I know. It's going to take time. I don't know yet what's on the other side of it. I know that too. But I know what I want to be on the other side of it, he said. I want you to know that. Whatever the next 72 hours are, Whatever the statement requires and whatever comes after, I know what I want. She looked at him. She was 31 years old, and she had spent 6 years building walls and 4 years catching men who didn't deserve the trust they were given, and 2 weeks inside a situation that had been manipulated into existence by 2 old women who had believed their certainty was the same as love. And standing on this sidewalk, in this city, at this particular midnight, she understood something she hadn't understood before. The manipulation didn't invalidate what was true. The walls didn't mean the thing behind them wasn't real. Running didn't mean you were always supposed to run. Write the statement, she said. I'll call Marcus. We have 72 hours. She started walking. He fell into step beside her. Their pace matched without either of them adjusting for it, the way 2 people walk when they've been moving in the same direction long enough that alignment is no longer something they have to think about. 3 blocks down, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. The same unknown number from earlier that night. Evelyn Ashford. She stopped walking. Damien stopped beside her. She held the phone out so he could see the screen. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Do you want to answer it?" she said. He looked at the phone for a long moment. His jaw worked once. His hands were loose at his sides. "Not yet," he said. She put the phone in her pocket. They kept walking. The phone buzzed a second time, then a third, then it stopped. And in the silence after it stopped, in the space between one step and the next on a wet midnight sidewalk with the city running its insomnia around them, Vivienne felt the exact shape of what was coming. Not the mechanics of it, not the press statements and the legal documents and the conversation with Evelyn that was still waiting somewhere in the near future like a stone in the road. Not the logistics, the thing underneath. The reckoning that comes when you have stopped running and turned around, and the thing you ran from is right there, and it is not what you thought it was at all. It was standing beside her, matching her pace, waiting for her to be ready, and for the first time in 6 years she thought she might be ready. The thought arrived without fanfare, without the particular ceremony she might have expected from something that had taken 6 years to arrive. It was just a thought, like any other thought, except it was heavier and quieter, and it settled into the floor of her chest and stayed there. She didn't say it out loud. She kept walking. Moshashan. They worked through the night. Marcus set up at Damien's kitchen table with both laptops running, and Richard Chu joined them by phone at 12:30 and in person by 1:15, a compact man in his 50s who wore the expression of someone accustomed to emergencies and had stopped being alarmed by them years ago. He shook Vivienne's hand with the recognition of a person finally meeting someone he'd been briefed on extensively, and he sat down and opened his own laptop, and they built the statement together across the next 4 hours. It was not a pleasant process. A complete account required every piece: the original marriage contract, Vivienne's departure, the 6 years of legal stasis, Sandra Colton's manufactured assignment, the honey trap at the Callaway, the identity Vivienne had used, the week of surveillance, the dinner at Marin's, Petra's infiltration of the company's systems, the client list, Evelyn. All of it, assembled in a sequence that was accurate and that told the true story rather than the story Petra had tried to construct. The part about Evelyn took the longest, not because the facts were complicated, but because Damien sat with those facts in a particular quality of stillness that the rest of them worked carefully around, leaving him space, not looking at him directly while he processed what it meant to include in a public document the information that his grandmother had faked her death and surveilled his life for 2 years. At 3 in the morning, he pushed back from the table and went to the kitchen and stood at the counter with his back to the room. Vivienne watched him from the table. Marcus and Richard found reasons to focus very intently on their screens. She got up and went to the kitchen. She stood beside him, not close enough to crowd. She poured 2 glasses of water from the tap, set one beside his hand, kept one for herself, and leaned against the counter next to him. "You don't have to include her," she said. "The statement works without the full Evelyn detail. We can characterize it as a family matter and leave the specifics private." "She'll surface eventually," he said. "Eventually isn't tonight." He looked at his water glass. He picked it up and drank and set it down. "She did it for me," he said. The same words he'd said on the phone to her 2 weeks ago in a context that now felt like a different story. "I know that doesn't make it right, but she—" He stopped. She was 82 years old, and she had watched everyone she loved make choices she believed were wrong, and she had spent her entire life believing the solution to watching people make wrong choices was to make the choice for them. He looked at the window above the sink, which showed nothing but the dark outside and their own reflections. She never learned the other way. She never understood that you could love someone and let them be wrong. "No," Vivienne said. "I have to decide if I'm going to be angry at her for the rest of whatever time she has left or if I'm going to—" He stopped. "You don't have to decide that tonight," she said. "I know. You can be angry tonight and decide the rest later." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of a man who is letting something down rather than putting something up, "I want to see her." Vivienne looked at the side of his face. "Not tonight," he said. "Not this week. But I want to see her. I want to sit in a room with her and hear her say it in person and decide how I feel about it when I'm looking at her instead of at the wall." He turned and met Vivienne's eyes. That's your decision," she said. "Not mine." "I know. I'm asking if it seems human," she said. "It seems human." Something in his face relaxed by a fraction. They went back to the table. The statement went out at 6:47 in the morning through Ashford Group's communications office and simultaneously through a public post from Vivienne's firm's official channels. Richard had argued for releasing it only through Ashford Group, which had the larger platform and the legal infrastructure to manage the response. Vivienne had argued that it needed to come from both of them equally, that a statement released only through his channels would look like his story with her as a footnote, and that the footnote version was exactly what Petra had tried to produce. Damien had sided with Vivienne. Richard had made a note in his file and moved on. The statement was 460 words. It said what needed to be said and nothing more. It acknowledged the marriage, explained the circumstances of its origin, explained Vivienne's departure and the years of dormancy, acknowledged the events of the past 2 weeks, including the assignment and the cover identity, characterized Petra Vile's actions accurately and without embellishment, and ended with a single sentence that had been Vivienne's contribution and that she had written in one pass without revision because it had arrived already complete. The marriage was arranged by other people. The relationship is ours. Marcus read that line and looked at her and said nothing, which was the right response. By 8 a.m., the statement had been picked up by 11 outlets. By 9 a.m., Petra Vile's attorney had contacted Richard with a proposal to settle the civil liability for the client list release out of court. Richard relayed this to Vivienne with the careful neutrality of someone who had opinions and was holding them. "What are the terms?" she said. He told her. She thought about it for 90 seconds. "Counter," she said, and told him what she wanted instead, which was more and more specific, and included a public acknowledgement of the breach from Petra directly, rather than a generic company-side statement. Richard made another note and went to make calls. She was standing on the sidewalk outside Damien's building in the early morning light, having stepped out for air. The city was doing its morning thing. Deliveries and coffee runs, and the particular quality of purpose that belonged to people on their way somewhere at 8 a.m. She'd been awake for 26 hours. She could feel it in the back of her eyes and the specific flatness of exhaustion that lived below the shoulders. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her father. She had been expecting this call for approximately 10 hours. She let it ring twice, which was how long it took her to decide, and then she answered. "I saw the statement," he said. "I know. You should have told me." "When?" She kept her voice even, the same voice she used for difficult conversations, stripped of heat, functional. "When should I have told you? Before the arrangement you helped construct without asking me, before I left? In the 6 years since?" She looked at the street. A woman walked past with 2 children and a coffee cup and the efficient stride of someone managing multiple things at once. "You've known where I was. You've had my number. You've called twice in 6 years, both times about money." Silence on his end. "I'm not interested in relitigating the arrangement," she said. "I'm not interested in an apology that arrives because I'm in the news. If you want to have an actual conversation at some point, a real one about what happened and why, I'm open to that. But not today." "Vivienne, not today," she said. "I'll call you when I'm ready." She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed the morning air and felt the particular exhaustion of a person who had spent the night dismantling the architecture of other people's decisions and was only now getting to the place where her own decisions began. She went back inside. Damien was asleep on his couch when she came back up, which he had apparently done in the 20 minutes she'd been outside. He was on his side with his jacket over him like a blanket, one arm tucked under his head, and he looked, for the first time in the 2 weeks she'd been watching him, entirely unguarded. No management, no containment, just a person who had run out of a wake. Marcus was still at the table, but the screens were dimmed, and he was eating a piece of toast that he'd apparently found and made without anyone noticing. He looked at her. He looked at Damien. He looked at her again with the expression of a man choosing his words with care. "Viv," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to say anything." "Good. He paused. "I've worked with you for 6 years. I've watched you run 37 of these assignments, and I've never once seen you look at a subject the way you look at him." "Marcus." "I'm done." He ate his toast. "That's all I had." She sat in the chair across from him and leaned her head back and closed her eyes and let the morning run without her for a few minutes. The Petra settlement was agreed by noon. The terms Vivienne had countered with were accepted with minor modifications. The public acknowledgement was scaled back from a full statement to a 3-sentence release, which Vivienne accepted because 3 sentences of direct accountability was more than she'd actually expected to get, and she knew when a negotiation had reached its natural ceiling. The licensing board complaint was formally withdrawn. The client list publication was permanently enjoined through a combination of the injunction and the settlement's NDA provisions. Mercer and Associates would survive. It would need work. There were clients who would see the coverage and question the confidentiality they'd been promised. And Vivienne was going to have individual conversations with the most exposed ones, and those conversations were not going to be pleasant. But the firm was intact. The foundation held. She sent Marcus home at 1 p.m. with instructions to sleep for 12 hours and come back prepared to rebuild. He hugged her on the way out, which he had not done since the night her grandmother died. She let him. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Damien woke up. He came in with his jacket in his hand and his hair slightly disheveled, which was the most undone she had ever seen him, and he looked at the coffee and then at her with the half-awake directness of a person whose management systems hadn't fully re-engaged yet. "What time?" he said. 1:15. He absorbed this. The settlement. Done. Petra's team accepted modified terms. The injunction. Holding. Richard has it structured to be permanent through the settlement. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his jacket over the back of the chair and ran a hand through his hair. She set a cup of coffee in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it. They sat in the kitchen in the afternoon quiet and drank their coffee and said nothing for a while. "I want to call Evelyn," he said eventually. "Okay. I'm not ready to forgive it. I don't know yet if forgiving it is the right thing or just the comfortable thing, and I need more time to understand the difference." He looked at the cup. "But I want to hear her voice. I want to know she's actually there." "That's different from forgiving it," Vivienne said. "Yes." "That's just not leaving something unfinished." "Yes." She looked at him across the table. 2 weeks of evidence. A life built on the premise that love was a transaction, and men were predictable, and running was a legitimate strategy for every problem that involved another person. She looked at the evidence of those 2 weeks, assembled and complete, and she allowed herself to see it clearly. He had been tested 7 different ways and had not taken any of the exits. He had known her real identity for 5 days and waited for her to come to him. He had heard the worst about his grandmother and turned toward honesty instead of protection. He had stood on a sidewalk in front of a building his family had built and told her he was sorry that the damage had come for her. He had matched her pace for 3 blocks without adjusting because the alignment was already there. She thought about the divorce papers still sitting on her laptop in her apartment, unsigned. She thought about the single sentence she had written in the public statement at 4 a.m, already complete, no revision required. The marriage was arranged by other people. The relationship is ours. "Damien," she said. He looked up. "I'm not going to sign the papers." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her with the full quality of his attention, the unguarded version of it that had been present since he'd woken up, and he did not perform any reaction. He sat with what she'd said the way he sat with everything, taking it in, letting it settle, understanding it fully before he responded. "Tell me why," he said. "Because I spent 6 years running from the version of this that was a transaction," she said, "and I spent 2 weeks watching the version that isn't, and they're different things, entirely different." She kept her eyes on his. "The arrangement was other people's decision. Staying is mine. I want you to understand that distinction." "I understand it. I'm not saying I know what this is yet. I'm not saying I know. I'm saying I don't want to sign the papers. I want to see what this is when it's not a crisis. When it's just two people in a room without anyone else's agenda running." He looked at her for a long moment. "I would like that," he said. "Very much." She nodded once. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside the kitchen window, the afternoon had gone gold with the particular light that arrived in this city around 2 p.m., when the sun found the right angle between the buildings. A light that was neither kind nor unkind, but was honest, illuminating everything exactly as it was. Geet. He called Evelyn that evening. Vivienne was not in the room for the call. She sat on the couch in his living room with a case file Marcus had forwarded, a new inquiry, completely unrelated to any of this, a straightforward assignment request from a potential client. And she read through it without reading it, listening to the rhythm of Damien's voice from the other room. Not the words, just the rhythm. It went for 22 minutes. She knew because she checked the time when it started and when the voice stopped. He came back into the living room and sat in the chair across from her. "She's in a house upstate," he said. "Has been for 2 years. She has 2 staff members. She said she's healthy, that her health wasn't the reason for the disappearance." He paused. "She wanted to step back from my life without triggering a search. She said if she simply moved away, I would have followed. She said she needed me to let go." "Did she apologize?" "She said she was sorry for the grief." He looked at his hands. "She was not sorry for the underlying decision. She said she would make the same choice again." Vivienne watched him. "That's honest, at least," she said. "Yes." He looked up. "I told her I needed time. She said she understood. She did not argue." A pause. "She asked about you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were here." He met her eyes. "I told her that whatever she'd built, the part of it that mattered most, hadn't gone the way she planned, that it had gone better." Vivienne sat with this. "Better," she said. "She was moving pieces," he said. "She was trying to engineer a specific outcome. What actually happened was you showed up and told me the truth about her, and we spent the night taking apart someone else's bad architecture and building something of our own instead." He paused. "She built a chessboard. We stopped playing chess." She looked at him. She thought about the pool and the cold water and the 4 seconds and the hand that let go. She thought about all the ways she had tested him and all the ways he had simply been himself under the testing, refusing to use the exits she offered, choosing the same thing over and over in different circumstances until it stopped being a choice and started being a character. "I need to go to my office tomorrow," she said. "I have clients to call. I have work to do." "I know. And you have—" She gestured vaguely at the scale of what his next week looked like, which included board communications and press management and the internal fallout from Petra's access breach and whatever came next with Evelyn. "I know," he said again. "So this is—" She looked at him. "This is us, going back to our lives." "With a difference," he said. "With a difference," she agreed. She stood up. She picked up her jacket. He stood up too, and they stood in his living room with the evening city outside the windows and all the work of the next week ahead of both of them, and the particular quality of a moment that does not announce itself as significant, but is. "I don't do this well," she said. Whatever this is, I don't have a record of doing it well." "Neither do I," he said. "My last serious relationship ended with the woman hacking my company's systems." She looked at him. Something in his face shifted, and then she was laughing. Actual laughter, surprised out of her, and she covered her mouth with one hand because it felt inappropriately large for the moment. And he was not laughing, but the not smile was there, and it was wider than she had ever seen it, and the room was briefly, completely itself. The laughter ran its course. She lowered her hand. He was looking at her with the specific quality of a man who has been given something he didn't expect and is still deciding what to do with it. "Call me this week," she said. "Not about the press situation, not about the statement, just call me." "I will," he said. She believed him. That was new. She noticed it and filed it and let it be what it was. She walked to the door. He walked her there, not preceding her, matching her step, and opened it. She turned in the doorway and looked at him one more time. "The marriage was arranged by other people," she said. He looked at her. "The relationship is ours," he said. She walked to the elevator. He stood in the doorway. She did not look back this time either, but the difference between this not looking back and all the previous ones was total, and she felt it in her spine. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator going down and let the week of it move through her. The pool and the coffee and the lobby bar and the dinner and Evelyn's voice on the phone and the night at Damien's table and the morning statement and the settlement and the laughter. And she stood in the middle of all of it and felt its weight and did not try to put it down. 1 year later, Mercer and Associates had 12 employees. The firm had rebuilt in the 8 months following the press coverage with a deliberateness that surprised even Vivienne. The transparency of the public statement had worked in ways she hadn't fully calculated, establishing a credibility that the firm's previous professional distance had always lacked. Clients knew who she was now. They came to her because of it, rather than in spite of it. 2 of the clients whose information had been briefly exposed by Petra's breach had sent referrals. One had sent a handwritten note that Vivienne kept in the second drawer of her desk. Marcus had hired 2 new analysts and was threatening to hire a third. Vivienne let him. She had closed 19 cases in the past year. She had taken 3 that she shouldn't have, for clients who reminded her of people she knew, and she had been honest enough with herself afterward to examine why and careful enough going forward to do better. She had turned away 4 cases where the client's stated goal was revenge rather than truth, which was a line she had always held but now held differently, with less clinical distance and more understanding of what it cost a person to be on the wrong side of it. Her father had called in March, 6 months after their sidewalk conversation. She had answered. They had talked for 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes longer than she'd expected, and said more real things than any conversation they'd had in 10 years. It was not a reconciliation exactly. It was an opening, and she left it open. She went to see her mother in April. Her mother lived in a house outside the city with a garden she'd been building for 15 years and a quietness that was not the worn-down quietness of Vivienne's childhood, but something she'd constructed deliberately on the other side of it. They had lunch and walked in the garden and talked about small things, and one large thing, and when Vivienne left, her mother hugged her with both arms and held on for a long time. Vivienne held on too. Evelyn Ashford came back. Not dramatically, not with the apparatus of a manufactured return. She drove down from upstate on a Thursday in May and rang the doorbell of Damien's apartment, and he answered it, and they stood in the doorway looking at each other for a long moment that Vivienne, who was in the kitchen, did not witness but heard in the quality of silence that preceded the voices. She stayed for dinner. She sat across the table from Vivienne and looked at her with the appraising directness of a woman who had spent 82 years being the most certain person in any room and was encountering, possibly for the first time, someone who would not be managed. "You're not what I expected," Evelyn said. "What did you expect?" Vivienne said. "Someone softer or someone angrier." She turned her water glass once. "You're neither." "I'm both," Vivienne said. "I just don't lead with them." Something moved through Evelyn's expression that was not quite approval, but was adjacent to it, and was honest, which Vivienne respected more than approval would have been. The dinner was not easy. It was not meant to be easy. Damien sat between them and said less than usual, which meant he was paying more attention than usual. And at the end of the evening, when Evelyn stood to leave, she put her hand briefly on his face, the way a woman touches the face of a grandchild she thought she'd arranged out of her life, and he let her. She shook Vivienne's hand at the door. Her grip was firm and specific. "I was wrong," she said, "about the method." "Yes," Vivienne said. "I was right about him." "You were right about him," Vivienne agreed. Evelyn left. Damien closed the door. They stood in the hallway of his apartment looking at each other. "How do you feel?" Vivienne said. "Like a person who has been through something," he said. "Like it might have been worth it." She looked at him. A year of calls and dinners and 2 trips, and the slow, uncomplicated accumulation of knowing someone without the emergency of a crisis as the organizing principle. A year of watching him make decisions and hold to them and let go of things when holding on would have been the smaller choice. A year of being known by someone who asked questions and waited for the real answers. It was worth it, she said. He looked at her across the hallway. I have something to ask you, he said. I know. He paused. You know? Marcus told me. You asked him if he thought the timing was right. He wasn't supposed to. He never tells me anything important, she said. He told me this because he was excited and he can't help it. Damien stood in his own hallway with an expression she had not quite seen before. Not the controlled directness, not the not smile, not the contained warmth. Something more open than any of those. Something that had come to the surface because it had run out of reasons to stay submerged. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. It's not an arrangement, he said. I know. It's not my grandmother's decision, or your father's decision, or anyone else's. It's mine. He held the ring between his fingers, simple, precise, the kind of thing chosen by someone who understood what she would and wouldn't want. And I want it to be yours. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about the pool, the cold water and the arm and the 4 seconds and the hand that let go, and then, slowly, over a year, in dinners and phone calls and mornings in the kitchen and an evening at his desk while he worked, and she read and neither of them needed to fill the silence, reached back. Yes, she said, not to the arrangement that had been made for her, not to the obligation her grandmother had constructed or the legal fiction that had sat on paper for 7 years, not to any of the external forces that had been moving pieces around a board that neither of them had agreed to stand on. To him. Specifically, completely, on her own terms. He put the ring on her finger. His hands were steady. She looked at his face, and it was the open version, the unguarded version, the version that had been building toward the surface since a hotel pool in the rain, and a hand that chose, precisely and deliberately, to let go. She put both hands against his chest. She felt his heartbeat under her palms, steady, present, entirely real. Outside the window, the city was the city. It did not mark the moment. It did not adjust itself for significance. It was simply there, enormous and indifferent and full of other people in other rooms making other decisions. And somewhere in all of it, on an ordinary Thursday evening in a hallway that smelled like dinner and the particular quality of a life that two people had built in the same direction, Vivienne Mercier held the heart of the one person she had spent 6 years not meeting and understood, finally and completely, what her grandmother had known, and what Evelyn had known, and what everyone who had tried to arrange and manage and engineer this moment had gotten wrong. You couldn't arrange it, you could only arrive at it. Through the long route or the short one, through the running and the returning, through the lies you told yourself and the truths you finally couldn't avoid. You arrived at it, and then you chose it, and then you chose it again, every single day. That was the whole of it. That was enough.